Hi, this is a message that this message is based on the message I shared in the church last Sunday, 24th February 2013. We have been looking at leadership, and we have been looking at many essential and important qualities and characteristics that should be found in a leader. And at this time we are studying from the book of Nehemiah. We are learning many things from the life and legacy of Nehemiah, the prophet of the Old Testament. For this day's portion, I have chosen Nehemiah chapter 7. I'll be reading some verses for you, and not all. Chapter 7, beginning at verse 1. After the wall had been rebuilt, and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers and the singers and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most men do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their own houses. Verse 4. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt. So my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found the genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. Now, from verse 6 to verse 73 is a big list of things, big list of names. I'm not going to read, and I'm just going to tell you what those names consist of. For example, the Parosh's family, verses 8 to 5. Verses 6 to 73 is a group of people that returned to Jerusalem from Babylon under the leadership of Zerubbabel. We do not know much about Zerubbabel. Now, the people listed here are varied and different. For example, Parosh family is listed between verses 8 and 5, and the people of Bethlehem and Netophah, verses 26 to 38. I mean, Parosh family was between 8 and 25. Bethlehem and Netophah people, 26 to 38, and priests, verses 39 to 42, Levites 43, singers 44, gatekeepers 45, temple servants 46 to 56, servants of Solomon 57 to 59, temple servants and descendants of the servants of Solomon, verses 60. And also listed are some towns, the people from some towns in verse 61, and again descendants of Beliah, Tobiah, and many other names are given in verse 62. And also there were priests again in verses 63 to 65, and totals 66 to 69. And giving to the temple is also there is also a list of people who gave generously to the work of the temple or the service of the Lord in verses 70 to 72. And then verse 73 talks about some settlements in Jerusalem, how things were going on. Now that's about the different kinds of people, but remember they were all common people. Now we will go to today's message. Of course, we are already in it. I would like to use some acronyms that we can remember very well. First of all, we will be studying the whole chapter of 7, and I'm not going to go read again and again many of the things. And we will see what things we learn under leadership of Nehemiah, what are some of the characteristics that we learn from the life of Nehemiah based on this chapter alone for today? First of all, in verse 1, chapter 7, we are in chapter 7, verse 1, we see the walls were completed. Any leader who has been challenged or questioned, the only proof of his leadership is the work completed. What has he done? What has he accomplished? What is the task that he has finished? Here we see in the life of Nehemiah that he completed the burden the Lord laid on his heart many years ago when he was still in Susan, the palace where he was a cupbearer to the king Artaxerxes. And now we see here, despite so many oppositions from all kinds of people from within, from without, those who were real enemies, those who were friends, who were with the enemies, all kinds of people, all kinds of opposition, but the walls are completed. That is the mark of a leader who has focused on his work to finish the job that was given to him, or the one that he took upon himself. That's an important mark of a leader. He accomplishes what he has taken up upon, or what he is entrusted with. In Nehemiah's case, the Lord laid a burden on his heart to build the walls of Jerusalem. And in verse 1 we see the walls were built, including the gates and all the things that go with the gates. So first we see walls completed, and second we see authorities commissioned. Now as soon as the walls were completed, Nehemiah could have said, okay, my work is done, I'm going back to Susa, where he was cupbearer and had a very jolly life, very comforting life. He left his comfort zone, back to Jerusalem, walked or came on horse, whatever. He worked hard while he was in Jerusalem. And also comes to mind, he was not like other leaders, other governors who were making a lot of money or buying a lot of lands. Mainly because he was concerned with the people that he was working with. He felt the burden was too much on the people, so he did not even use some privileges given to him as the governor of the city. That's the character of Nehemiah. He cared for people more than he cared for himself. Cared for people more than he cared for his own properties. So let's look at authorities commission. First we see he shares his authority and responsibility. Now that is an important part, an essential part in any leadership, a family, business, church, or a parachurch organization. Shared authority, shared responsibility is very important to get the things done. Here we see Nehemiah continues to stay in Jerusalem even though the walls are completed, but he appoints some important people to share his responsibility and the privileges that come with the responsibility. He shares his authority and shares his privileges that come with those authorities. Let's see who he appoints. Now, one of the important things when he appoints people along with him to take care of the things, he uses the same measure that he used against himself. What is that? Number one, man of integrity. Number two, man who feared God more than anybody else. Hanani and Hananiah are the two people he appointed, and he describes them as men who were living with authority. I am sure there were people around these people in the villages, in the towns. People probably came out and said, they were talking about these two people, saying, hey, look at these people. He's a man of God. He's a man of integrity. And that is the kind of people he chose. He used the same measure that he used against himself. We also saw in the previous weeks how that Nehemiah was a man of God. Because he feared God, all things he did, there was a difference in the way he did things. He did not do many things like the other previous predecessors or the previous governors who were lording over them. Even the people, the servants of the governors, were lording over people. Nehemiah did not do all those things because he feared God. And that's the same measure he uses here when he appoints, commissions authorities over the city, of which the walls he built just now and ready to go. So first thing we saw is walls completed. Second, we saw authorities commissioned. And then there is some important thing about the city, some kind of some policy in the city he establishes. Again, going back to the traditions, going back to the scriptures, he establishes the tradition that the walls, the gates, should not be opened until the sun is hot. Usually in any ancient times especially, they measured time from sun up to sundown. And here we see Nehemiah says and commands them to keep this rule, whether in his presence or in his absence, that the gate should be opened only when the sun is hot. That means it should be about 10, 11 at that time, not by 6 or 5 or even 7. The reason here is because of the security of the city. Because early morning people will be sleeping. So only when the sun is hot, you can be sure that all people are up. Of course, there will be some people who might sleep in the hot sun too, but forget those people. So the gates to be opened only when the sun is hot. He establishes a policy to take care of the city, to secure the city from the coming enemies, invading enemies. So he commissions authorities and he commands those authorities he has appointed to follow the policy that he has established. And then also we see in between verses 2 and 3, guards were commissioned. Now one more thing we have to observe here. Who were these guards? These guards were not from military ranked people. These were families. One of the things that we see in the book of Nehemiah is the involvement of families in establishing the walls around Jerusalem. It's the families that were responsible citizens in Jerusalem at that time. We also know that some of the nobles were unwilling to put their shoulders to work. But it was general, common, families by families. They helped put the walls together. Thick walls, high walls, they put together by families. And we see here some residents were posted at the post and some near their own houses. So walls completed. Nehemiah did not go back, my work is done. No, he continued to do more related to the city, related to the people in the city, the security of the people. And that's one thing we understand, that in serving the Lord there is no limited time, there is no retirement. One work is done, go to the next one. One work is done, go to the next one. That is how we need to serve the Lord, and the Lord will give us strength to do the same. And the third word I want to leave with you today is the city details. Note here, he doesn't say kingdom, because that was the blame placed against him by Tobiah and Sanballat, saying that you have appointed prophets to call yourself, declare yourself king. You are establishing a kingdom. That was the blame they gave. But he kept to his commission. He says the city, not kingdom. When this verse reads, it said there were so many, the city was big, but the people were few. Nehemiah, whenever he referred to his Jerusalem at that time, he never said this is the kingdom. He said this is the city, because he knew he was sent as a governor to the city of Jerusalem. So there were few people in the city, but it was a large city. And one more thing we observe here, how the families, how the people worked hard to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. We see here their houses were not rebuilt. Remember, after Zerubbabel's coming, they rebuilt the temple, and now under under Nehemiah's leadership, the walls are rebuilt. And once again, I remind you again, rebuilding or repairing something is much more harder than buying a new thing. And all these people worked hard, clearing all the rubble around their houses and around the city, carrying the weights on their shoulders. They worked hard rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem were against that somebody has come to rebuild the fallen city. They were against it very much. Now, the fourth word I want to leave with us today is census. Back in the days of David, we know David took a census, and the Bible makes it very clear that it was inspired by Satan, not God. Now here is one important thing. How do we know that the thoughts that I get is from Satan or from the Lord himself? There are so many things to consider. I would like to give certain things. In David, let's compare David and Nehemiah. In David's time, there was no war, and he was filled with pride. He said, I want to know how great a king I am. That was his purpose. And there was no temple at that time, and it was not a war time, and no returning people. People did not return from captivity or from any other kind of such thing. And it was not necessary at that time for David to count the people, to take a census, to make a registration of people. He just wanted to know how many war-ready people he had in his kingdom. So the situation was not a warranty to count the people. Even though his assistant Joab told him, may the Lord increase your people, he was not even willing to count and go along with the king. But the Bible says he forced himself upon his assistant to go and count the people. Let's compare that to Nehemiah's time. Now the temple has been rebuilt quite recently, and new walls have come up just now, and there has been people returning from captivity from other countries, and there is potential threats against war against the Jerusalem people. There was a real potential threat to engage in war, and therefore it was necessary. And Nehemiah says one more important thing. Once again, he says, the Lord laid upon my heart to do a registration. In other words, census. So that is how we know. We look at the situation, we look at the leading of the Lord clearly. Now, one thing about the leading of the Lord. The Lord leads very clearly. For example, let's think about how the Lord led the people of Israel through the desert. Pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. You know, suddenly one day, one person living in one tent would go and tell somebody else, I think the Lord is leading us to go and start moving. You know what the reply would be? The reply would be, no, it is not what you feel, what you think, it is what the cloud says. The cloud of pillar, the cloud of fire is the measure is the only objective way you know how the Lord is leading. So they followed the cloud. In a similar way, the Lord speak to us, to our minds clearly. There will be no confusion when the Lord is involved, when the Lord is invited in our conversation and in our life's decisions. There will be clarity. There is no confusion in the Lord's leading. So that's about senses. And finally, we also see one more thing about how Nehemiah decided to consult the old records, the genealogical records. And based on that, some priests were excluded from priesthood because their names were not found under the genealogical names of priestly line. Now, one thing about records. As a leader, whatever you do, whatever you say is always recorded. And it has to be very clear. So it's important to consult wise counseling, consult wise decision makers, wise helpers to make your decisions easy, to get you make your decisions easy. So it's important to consult documentation. So it's important to keep in mind that documentation is a very important thing, is an essential thing in leadership. Now finally, I would like to close with a note from the wisest man in the world. Not right now, in the olden ancient world, Solomon. Let's read Proverbs 25 verse 28. Give me a minute while I take it up. Proverbs chapter 25 verse 28. Like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. Now we have talked much about the literal walls around Jerusalem, but there's another city the Bible talks about very, very clearly, and it is more important than the walls, brick walls or stone walls, whatever. Self-control. Let me read that verse again. Like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. You know, this world is full of temptations, sin, and all kinds of deceptions. If I do not have self-control, if I do not have control over my own spirit, if I'm not disciplined with myself, if I am not disciplining myself in looking at what I look at, in thinking before I think, so many things are there. They will invade into my life and I will be like a city without walls. If I do not keep a tab on what I hear, what I see, and what I entertain myself with, I will be like a city without walls. Soon, destruction, enemies' invasion will take over and I will be flat pretty soon. So the Bible, the wisest man said, a man without self-control is like a city without walls. So may the Lord help us to keep ourselves pure, to keep ourselves dedicated, to keep ourselves holy, so that we will not be like a city without walls. It's important for us to take responsibility and be like Nehemiah, building our own selves, feeding on the word, feeding on prayer, feeding on fellowship with other believers. These things really make us keep up and grow up. So let us be like Nehemiah, building ourselves, building our families, building our businesses, and building our churches. Go in the name of the Lord. Amen.